Hello and welcome to Liberty Action Network TV. My name is Al Freck, and tonight we're going to be discussing education, and specifically an education reform known as Common Core and its companion, PARC. And with me tonight to discuss that is Carolee Adams. And Carolee is the president of Eagle Forum. She's a former member of the press to the National Governors Association Summit on Education, a former business director for a leading international financial services corporation. Welcome, Carolee.
Good evening, Dr. Freck. It's very nice to be here. Thank you.
Carolee, this Common Core and PARC has sparked some controversy, and I wonder if you can briefly, for our viewers, give us a quick summary of what it is, where it came from, and what's the controversy.
I'll begin by just taking the nickname Common Core and PARC and just give you an exact title for it. It's the Common Core State Standards Initiative and the Partnership for the Assessment of Readiness for College and Career, both of which are misnamed. When it refers to state standards, most people will tend to think, oh, okay, we had something to do with it in New Jersey. But actually no one in New Jersey had any participation in its development. No legislator, no parent, no teacher. It's a tops-down, federally driven, nationalized education, which is the first in the history of the United States of America. And PARC, while we have the state standards, which is basically the curriculum, then PARC is the assessment factor, the testing factor. And when they say readiness for college and career, it's a mythological hype when they tout that it's supposed to be of internationally benchmark standards to put us in the same realm as the best in the world, and that's not true. The furor is basically because, as I said, it is tops-down, federally driven. There is no local input. Board of Educations have no more than 15% of the say to change whatever it is. It is it violates the United States Constitution, and it violates 3 federal laws, in addition of which one of them is the actual development of the Department of Education. The federal government is not supposed to mandate the state standards and the assessments for the states.
Okay, wow, it's a lot there. So how did this get to be? How did it get to be in all the states? Who wrote it? Where did it come from?
Initially, in 2010, as an example, 45 states signed on to it, but basically because they put their hand out for federal funds. It was at a time of deep recession for most of the country, so that here in New Jersey, our governor accepted $38 million without even having the standards, the assessments written. And people do ask, where did it come from? And I would just say it was lurking in the shadows, that these are not people who are educational PhDs. They are educrats. We have people such as Sandra Stotsky, who does have her PhD, who wrote the state standards for English in Massachusetts, and they were the A+ standards for Massachusetts. She was on the validation committee. She refused to sign off on it because she believed that it was a dumbing down for it. She was the only professional educator regarding English literacy, as well as a Dr. Milgram, the only mathematician, professional mathematician, who refused to sign off on the standards. So who wrote them is a group of people that have a particular agenda, who believe they know better than parents and local educators, and even those touted educators such as Sandra Stotsky or Milgram, or even a Diane Ravitch, who was a former United States Assistant Secretary of Education. To point to any particular people in general, I'll say that Bill Ayers has some participation in the development of another type of assessment called Smarter Balanced.
And just to jump in for a second, for our viewers who might not know Bill Ayers, can you just briefly say who he is?
Bill Ayers is a former domestic terrorist who would probably redefine terrorism as a freedom fighter today, and he does happen to be a professor and has his pedigrees, but he has a particular penchant to change education to fit his particular worldview, and it certainly isn't the worldview of many people. particularly parents who have kids in the public school system today.
So let's get into the nitty-gritty of the Common Core in the park. What does it consist of? What's the stated purpose? The stated purpose of Common Core?
The stated purpose is that we're going to have all children on the same playing field. One size fits all. Doesn't matter if your school has exceptionally good curriculum and standards, you're just going to fit into the box of Common Core so that everybody can be compared, one school to another. The testing results, you can compare one school to another. They think that if you move from state to state, then like a McDonald's, you'll know exactly what your education is going to be about in another school system. But that never quite works. It's proven to be a failure. They claim that it fits in with international standards, but we have proof to know that even those countries that do have nationalized standards, they don't do any better or any worse than what the United States has been doing in the past.
You mentioned that states signed on because they had really money dangled in front of them. But so the implication there to many parents or teachers or whatever, that's a good thing. If 45 states signed on to it, must be a great thing. And so maybe you can share a little bit about, but what is actually involved in implementing this Common Core?
There is a great technological component to it. All children will be using computers, and that is one reason why there is a great concern about the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation being involved. They contributed to the funding of Common Core and Park, but the return on their investment will be absolutely huge. In addition to that, you'll have textbooks that are driven by silly questions like, well, if you had a Band-Aid on your skin, what color would you prefer your Band-Aid to be? It's multicultural, but once again, the one size fits all, it's really geared to kids in failing schools, but nevertheless, I know parents in Newark who decidedly oppose this because there's no local control in their children's education. And regarding the funding, when you say 45 states signed on, since that time, other states have backed away from it. States like Indiana have asked for a timeout, a pause, to determine how much is it really going to cost them. How do the assessments and the standards really compare to what they have in Indiana already? And Michigan has stopped funding it completely. Here in New Jersey, we're actively pursuing a similar path as well, too. So it's no longer 45 states. They've come to realize this is one of the hottest topics in the country today. There was a Twitter event where over 9 million tweets were made opposing Common Core, and it has very diverse opposition. You have even the NJEA has asked for a year pause. You have teachers who are very concerned about teaching to the test. You certainly have parents and local educators who want to have more input into the education of their children. But the monies, when you talk about $38 million, Jerry Brown in California just asked for $1 billion more. And in Florida, another $440 million more. So our $38 million is probably all dried up. So how much more can we expect for the federal government to give us, and what do they expect in return for it?
Well, that is a good question. What happens? You mentioned the testing part of it. There's testing in Park. Can you explain a little bit about that and how that will occur?
Well, it's basically what you have. The acronym is you teach to the test, and teachers are opposed to that because whatever is being taught is going to be tested. Now, that would seem to make a lot of sense, but when I went to school, we were prepared to take an algebra test anytime, any week. It didn't matter. We were always prepared. The stress upon the children, and a lot of parents are opting out of it now because the extraordinary stress of the testing. Some people say the testing can go on for weeks, not just days. And then, of course, the teachers will be judged as to the results of that test. And, you know, I could expect that parents and taxpayers would say, well, yes, they should be held accountable for that particular responsibility. But nevertheless, when a good education really is comprised of three things. It's like a three-legged stool. A good teacher, a student prepared to learn, and a good curriculum. In this case, it is not a good curriculum. It's a weak curriculum where educators see the real weaknesses to it regarding English literacy and also math and history and all the rest of it.
Well, when we think about testing, we think about that as a way to measure what one has learned. And I guess I'm thinking about the philosophy behind this. What is the expectation that children should learn? What should they learn, according to Common Core, that is going to make this so much different than what we had?
In the 1990s, there was an effort called School to Work, later changed to School to Work to career, then School to Work to college and career. Common Core Park is really a grandchild of that. And that School to Work was basically to teach children. It wasn't about education, it was about training. Training for the global economy, training for jobs. And a liberal education really should supply your student with a very diverse amount of material so that their skills are such they could apply their education to any number of different jobs. But in Common Core Park, as it was with School to Work, they were being focused on a job. Informational text, as an example, is part of the English literacy instead of being, learning from classical literature, which some people think, well, that's old hat. Well, it really isn't, because when you study the great thinkers, you're going to think with greater depth and detail, rather than once again focusing in on a job. And I do remember a man from the AFL-CIO who pointed out to me that he had a great liberal education, but it enabled him to apply to any number of jobs, not to one specific job that in 3 years' time or 5 years' time could evaporate as times change, and they're ever changing so quickly now. So learning how to use a computer, I think most students are quite adept at that already. They're certainly far more adept than their parents and their grandparents. And so that shouldn't be the reason why we're changing an entire form of education to fit the technological revolution. The students are well equipped to use technology, I believe, right now.
This is one of the things that we've heard and read about in the run-up to this, and that it was education in the United States is horrible. It's really terrible. It has to be redone, and it should be more like other countries. And we should benchmark it. Can you talk a little bit about what they mean by the benchmarking with other countries and things like that?
Well, as I stated before, now Canada, as an example, doesn't even have a Department of Education. They don't have nationalized testing. So is their education any worse or better than the United States of America? No. It really makes no difference. As I stated before, some countries do have better results than other countries. But I'll give you an example. A man by the name of Yang Zhao. Yang Zhao is from China, and he was invited by someone called by the name of Mark Tucker to go to China and to study their educational system there. And eventually it was Yang Zhao, who's quite interested in such nationalized standards, pointed out that he could not support Common Core and Park because it was teaching to the test. He said, do you want to teach children how to think, or do you want to teach them what they're supposed to think? And that's the big difference.
It's interesting, because I read a lot about teaching students skill sets, as opposed to, as you mentioned before, thinking, conceptually thinking. And it sounds like that fits with what you were talking about preparing children for the world of work by teaching them certain skill sets. But it sounded very narrow. And I'm wondering if you've heard reports on this from teachers, or what are the teachers' reactions to all this?
Well, it's mixed. I think that the teachers who truly value the profession of teaching, a very admirable profession, want to be able to see in a child something rather extraordinary that they can explore and that they can develop. But if they are limited in focus in what they can teach them and what they can expect from them, then you're going to have limited results. Dorothy Sayers wrote a great essay years ago. It's called The Lost Tools of Learning. Had to do with grammar and rhetoric and logic. And those were the tools that gave America the greatest educational system in the world, and we have left that far behind.
Sad.
It's tragedy. I mean, to have a child, to have his creative ability stifled, smothered with training rather than education. Talking with a child about a butterfly can be so much fun, but if you're just going to talk to them about something that's going to prepare them for a job, and they did this in the 90s. They basically were going to take children out of school one day a week, put them in any job. They were teaching them in down Atlantic City how to put lemon wedges on glasses and dip strawberries in chocolate, because that was the jobs in the casinos. They were changing the child labor laws so that they could serve liquor. I mean, we're only seeing the beginning of the process with Common Core and Park. More will come.
When you say more will come, what are you thinking about? What are you anticipating?
Once again, it's a managed economy. Now, they don't use those words now, but they did use those in the 1990s, and they found out that that was not very acceptable and pleasing to the public. So they don't use the terms now, but that's exactly what it is. And you know, parents will drop their children off at the schoolhouse door, and the state will take good care of them to train them for whatever they think is going to be the growth industry. But as it's been proven in Germany time and time again, the growth industries evaporate. I mean, and then the children are trained for that job, and the job doesn't exist. And they have to, the skill set that they have is only geared for one facet. So the managed economy aspect it will become increasingly apparent to us in time, and it was more apparent in the 90s, but it will come because Mark Tucker was involved. He wrote a 19-page letter, typewritten single-space letter to Hillary Clinton on the eve of the Clinton election about this entire managed economy concept in school to work, and Mark Tucker is still very much involved in the development of Common Core and Park today.
You know, as you're talking about the school system, the way it will be under this, it sounds like almost like a corporate model, and the student is the product, and we're turning out products to fit somewhere, but we're not turning out thinkers.
No, we're not. They are guinea pigs, and that is why in Indiana, as an example, they've asked for the timeout to really hold public hearings, statewide public hearings, so we could expose this. There's been no input whatsoever to determine the cost factor, to see the assessments that we have now and compare them what the assessments are in the future. But reading what I've already read from the people who are professional educators, so far I cannot see anything in Common Core and Park that matters other than to the people who dangle the strings of education, and to how much influence they will have upon our children and their lives, and the parents will have no say whatsoever in it. And we have legislators in Washington, D.C. who have sent them to the Department of Education and other sources. They were thinking at one time of merging the Department of Education and Labor for this very purpose. And so we're waiting to see whether or not we get responses. We've asked here in New Jersey, we've asked members of the legislature and the Education Committee and the Budget Committee to ask Commissioner Cerf, ask him some questions about this. He seems to be very much in favor of it. I have not found any legislator that likes it. In fact, a leading Democratic legislator said to me, nobody likes it here in the state of New Jersey except for Commissioner Cerf. That's how very opposed most people are, and yet we haven't sufficiently elevated our concerns. We need a bill. We need those public hearings, and I tend to think, like with School to Work, when that happened in the 90s, the issue went away.
You know, it reminds me of a number of years ago, the program for whole language, which was touted as this is the great new approach to reading, and teachers were told they had to get on board with it. Where is it today? It's disappeared. I hear nothing about it today.
The fads of education. I mean, I was just reading about the establishment of the United States Department of Education, and supposedly when Jimmy Carter produced it, he said that their budget wouldn't be more than $13 billion. Today, it's $1 trillion. And where is the money going? It's going to fads, unproved. That's why we would like to have Common Core tested. We would like to see an exact comparison of what it's intended to do, because the mythological hype about what it's intended to do, this is not the proudest moment in our history, as Commissioner Cerf said. This is a very disgraceful moment in our history to introduce this to the public, and the parents must rise up. The local boards of education, I encourage them. I know I went to my own local board of education meeting, and they said that all of the other local boards in their region were all complaining as they have no input into it. Well, put your foot down and demand to have input until we can extract ourselves from this here in the state of New Jersey, as are other states trying to do right now.
And do you find, I know you talked about it, it seemed that you were saying that legislators are aware of this. Are you talking about state legislature? You're talking about our congressional
I'm
representatives?
talking about both. In Congress, we have a letter from the House of Representatives from a Representative Lukemeyer. We also have one in the Senate, and Congressman Garrett has just introduced a bill called the LEARN Act, and encourage people to get involved in promoting that. The LEARN Act, I believe the acronym stands for Let Education Authority Return Now, meaning back to local authority, so that we can opt out of these federally mandated programs that are unconstitutional, and that the monies that we would get from them instead, we would keep more of our money. We would get tax credits for not using federal funds, and then the authority would come back at least to the states. As I stated before, it started not just under the current administration, but into No Child Left Behind. And they're having meetings next week in Congress about the Elementary and Secondary Education Act and its renewal, and No Child Left Behind. And all of these, I would say even that is a fad. All children have been left behind somewhat with all of these fads. And when it comes to phonics instead of whole language, children do learn how to read very, very acceptably. Most children do, learning phonics, and that today is considered old-fashioned, old hat, and I don't think it, I do believe most children today have learned how to read very well, adults today, because they learned how to read via phonics, and that's been set aside.
What strikes me is, if I heard you right, is this has never been really field tested anywhere.
No.
This is all theoretical.
You're right.
And that's astonishing, that our children, and I think you mentioned this, wind up being guinea pigs for a program that has yet to been evaluated, tested and evaluated.
And once we have those state public hearings here in New Jersey, once we have a comparison of the assessments, once we find out how much money is really going to cost us, I think we can defeat this. And that's why your program here today is so important, so that parents and educators and others and taxpayers recognize that they must speak out to their legislators and demand that they respond to our hope for the public hearings and for the testing. Diane Ravitch, who has been for many years involved in education and now is retired, says that she could not support this because it's never ever been field tested. She's not a conservative by no means. She served under both a Democratic and a Republican president, but she would like to have it field tested. That's the one thing I've got to have it field tested.
And if I remember reading some of her columns, she was actually, in the beginning, she was on board with Common Core before she found out more and more and did more listening and learning. And
I interviewed her in the 1990s. She was at the Governor's Summit, and yes, she was on board at that particular time for School to Work, because I think we were grappling, and many people are grappling. The Chamber of Commerce is supporting. They want children to come out of school so they're ready for a job. But you're not going to teach work ethic, as an example, via Common Core. A student has to be prepared to learn from his parents, by his parents first and foremost, and then the teacher's left to do the rest, if not all, in many cases, unfortunately. But there is no standard within Common Core that I believe of that really prepares a student to learn to apply himself to many different types of jobs. And the Chamber of Commerce should be willing to accept that. But they're very desperate for worker bees, and I still think that we can provide them with what they want, with the proper education that the United States used to be very proud of. People come to this country for their education of their children and their grad students, and we're leaving that behind.
You know, there's the saying, follow the money. And in this case, who makes out with this? Who stands to benefit financially big time from this?
Well, it's often touted that the National Governors Association and the chief state school officers, they have approved this. Well, they are trade associations, and they actually get donations from organizations such as the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Once again, the Gates Foundation is a key player in this, and they have given monies to this and probably will give more monies, but once again, because of the use of computers and Microsoft and everything else, the return on their investment will be huge. It's quite puzzling. I mean, I can understand it's great for somebody to donate funds to a charitable, for a good purpose, but with education, they have no right to tell us how to educate our children. So that the money is follow the money, yes, there's a great deal of money. Plus, in addition to that, you have a tremendous amount of curriculum providers who make a lot of money off this. Consultants. I mean, when I spoke to the Newark parents, and they said, oh, we're underfunded, and I'm thinking, underfunded? How could that be? And they told me that the Zuckerman money that went down in Newark was being spent on consultants. So Common Core, it's the same thing. There's a huge contingency of consultants who are making a lot of money off education.
Carolee, we have a few minutes left, but I'd like you to address parents. And what would you tell parents to ask or to say to their boards of ed or to their PTOs? What would be the important thing for them to raise?
If I may, there's a disc that I have here with me. It's Stop National Common Core Power Grab, and it's stopcommoncore.com. And I would encourage parents to, you can actually watch this on YouTube for free.
Okay.
But some people in the state have actually bought this. I don't know what, it's cheaper by the dozen. It's $10 for a single disc. And they've given it to their Board of Education members, as I have given it to my Board of Education members. It's a 5-part series. It's roughly 28 minutes long, and it will tell the Board of Education why we oppose it. And I tend to believe that most boards of education would agree with everything that's mentioned on this disc. We're looking for, every year the Board of Education, the National Association of School Boards has an annual meeting. We're looking for a resolution where they would oppose that. We've gone before the state school board and asked them to similarly oppose it. And they did oppose it finally in the 1990s when we proved that we were right and they were wrong. And they said to us at that time, we're learning things from you that we didn't know before. That's our state school board association. I mean, so if the state school board doesn't know, the local school boards may not know either. And I have had calls from Board of Education members throughout the state who want as much help as they possibly can get from us so they could get it off their backs, because it's one school board's talking about $500,000, another $300,000. They can't afford it. They want help from us. And so this disc is one way of helping them prove to them that we don't want it either, and that and they should call up their legislators too and ask them that we want a bill to put a timeout on Common Core.
Carolee, we're just about out of time. Want to thank you for coming on and kind of clarifying what this is all about, and so. We urge everyone to get out there and to learn more, to speak up, and we'd like to thank everybody for looking in tonight, and thank Carolee for being here. And remember, please check in for more information to campusteaparties.com. That's campusteaparties.com.
Thank you, Dr. Frick.
Thank you. This is very good. Very good. You said that you were having someone come in. Are we done?
Yes. You're done?